Yay, we are live. And this time I didn't miss the soft opening. I actually looked out for it. So I can do a more normal intro, a little more staid, something a little, a little less exciting for the folks at home. Welcome to the MMA Prospectus. I am joined as always by my esteemed co-host, Tom Grant. We are here to talk MMA prospects, scouting, looking around at the MMA world in general, a broad view, if you will, of MMA as sport. And principally this week, we're going to be looking back at UFC 198. We're going to talk a little bit about heavyweights because of UFC 198 mostly. And then, maybe take a breeze around the MMA world at large this weekend on a non-UFC week where there's still a shit ton of prospect stuff going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, first and foremost, we got this 198 card in front of us here, and from a prospect perspective, there are a couple of guys that we really have to jump in and talk about, and I'll give you your choice. First and foremost, Thiago Santos or Renato Moicano.
Well, probably Moicano. I mean, Santos kind of made his breakthrough, like name value wise, but Nate Marquardt has been a shot for a little while now. I think Moicano is a guy who more gets me. I'm more interested to see where he goes next because I feel like he's actually climbing somewhere. Even though in this fight he didn't really hit like second gear, like he kind of never really got out of that first gear in this fight. Did enough to win, but never really kicked it in, and it's not totally unexpected considering the fact that he took all of 2015 off because of an injury.
Yeah.
Or was he hurt or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moicano was hurt.
Yeah, so not shocking that he had like a little bit of trouble finding it again, but overall, I like his overall game. I think it's really well geared towards the international rules or the unified rules and the scene. And I thought he had a fairly solid showing against the guy in Tugov, man, talk about not hitting the next gear. Like, Tugov barely got out of neutral in that fight.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, this is really like I picked Moicano going into this fight, and this is very much why I picked Moicano going into this fight. Is that Tugov has this thing where it's like he either hurts you with one of these big shots that he throws every now and then, or he's just gonna kind of be at this really slow ebb, and he'll let guys take rounds off of him. This was a good. I mean, this was an interesting fight too, in that since they were both counter strikers, they're both forced to lead a lot in this fight, and Moicano just does a better job of leading.
Yeah, that kicking offense really showed itself. Really did a nice job of kind of setting a tone and filling the slower spots of the fight with Moicano offense because Tugov was just not throwing offense.
Yeah, it was weird too, though, for the commentary of that fight with Goldberg and Stan, who's normally very good, and it was actually Goldberg who first noticed. They spent like the first half of the fight talking about how Moicano needed to work harder and that Tugov was outlanding him. And then suddenly, somewhere in the second round, Goldberg was like, Tugov really needs to actually up his output a little. It's just like, yes, he's not. I don't know what you guys are looking at in this fight.
I kind of got a little thrown on Stan, like really seeing thrown by Tugov, like not being aggressive. But so I was thinking, like watching him, he's a counter fighter. That's who he is. That's who he's been. I'm not sure. I got a little thrown by the commentators on that fight. Both of them seemed to be like a little bit off on, I don't know, at least off of what I took away from watching tape on these guys, then off of what I saw in this fight.
Yeah, it didn't seem like they were very prepared for what was going on, and it ended up with some really weird commentary for that fight. There was a lot of trouble picking out who was leading what and winning and when and why.
Stan is usually like hyper prepared. The man is usually like really on top of things. But I mean, that's what this fight was. What happens if you match two counter strikers against each other? You get a slow paced fight, and it still doesn't mean we didn't learn something from it. I find it to be one of the more informative showings on a card where the veterans really got the better of the prospects overall.
Yeah, by a fairly wide margin across the board. That's why I picked out Moicano for his good showing off a long injury layoff against a tough opponent, and then Thiago Santos for his good showing against a not as tough opponent. But just to jump up to Santos, the reason that, while we say that, and it's been repeated often at this point, that Nate Marquardt isn't necessarily that impressive of a win anymore, this was a really impressive performance for me from Santos. Like, this is exactly what you hope to see when a guy is in against somebody that he should be able to beat.
Yeah, no, exactly. And he went in there and he just trashed him.
Yep.
Santos, I mean, like, he's 33. He's in his 6th year of professional fighting. This is his time. Or he's 32. Yep. But this is his time. He should be starting to put on truly dominant performances. In his last 3 fights, he's looked pretty damn good.
Yeah, he's really, you can see everything starting to click, even though, maybe his boxing will never be like elitely polished. He's really starting to figure out when to use it and to figure out his timing and his accuracy better with his punches to match up with his kicks. And he looked absolutely dominant out there. It was a really great performance, and I'm really excited to see him going forward against the upper echelons of the division, as he's basically no longer a prospect at this point. He's now a complete fighter who should be getting the toughest fights available.
Yeah. I think of the other ones, one of the more impressive showings on this card was Chagas. Especially that first round against Sergio Moraes was really impressive. Really came in, looked fired up, ran out of gas a little bit. Moraes really showed off like that veteran savvy of weathering the storm and then taking over late. I didn't hate the draw here, but
Yeah, Chagas really impressed me a lot more than his regional performances would have had me believe. He's been a big flashy kicker regionally, which we saw again here, but mostly a lot on the regional scene. He's really rushed in and just thrown a bunch of sloppy punches to close into the pocket, tried to take guys down and hulk them on the ground. And I think that finally having somebody who could absolutely out-grapple him in front of him forced him to play a range game for once and actually made him rely on his kicking game. And that showed a much better fighter. Now he just has to solve that cardio problem, because you can see from his build, he's got that kind of like muscular Hulk build, and then he throws all these huge single strikes that require a ton of energy. And by the time the fight got to the 3rd round, he was just absolutely running on fumes.
Yeah, no, it was. I think we saw the best and worst of him, and yeah, he looked significantly less wild than he did on his regional scene. I think you're absolutely right. I think the quality of the fighter in front of him, and specifically the fact that Moraes is a ground fighter and that he had to kind of rein in his aggression for fear of being taken down, I think actually improved his game. And he looked, overall, it was one of those that watching him fight, you thought that this guy could learn the game well enough at 22 and having he's been fighting 4 years.
Yeah.
He might be a really nice pickup for the UFC.
Yeah, I mean, cardio issues, that kind of thing is something that fighters, some fighters can solve it, some can't. But it feels like he's young enough, and that if he can figure that out, he could be a really fun action fighter as he continues to develop in the UFC.
Yeah.
So now we got to talk, who was the most disappointing of the prospect class here? Was it Warlley Alves?
I would have probably Alves.
There you go.
As I just stumble over his first name, I think Alves would have to be the most disappointing because it was a fight that was there for him to win on several occasions, and he just didn't seem to really have the awareness of how to take over that fight, because he was actually doing very well in range. I thought he was landing very effectively, and just didn't seem to know how to handle Barberena's just pure volume. Where it was when they were in exchanges, Alves was landing the better shots.
Yeah.
And then he would kind of take a moment to rest, and Barberena would keep punching.
Yeah, Alves, he needs to learn this, and I'm surprised he didn't learn it after the Alan Jouban fight. Maybe because he won that fight, and then won a couple other fights really nicely and easily. He kind of forgot that he needed to learn this again. But it's just he can't expect to put away every fighter in the first round. And he came out and he fought Barberena like he would absolutely put him away. He came out, threw him to the ground, jumped on a guillotine, and then didn't get it. And once he didn't get it, he threw a bunch of really huge power shots at full strength for a round, and then he was tired. And then he spent the rest of the fight trying to survive and land sporadic big power shots with his limited gas tank. And he survived, but Barberena just was able to fill all the space with volume and land more consistently, be just a better offensive fighter throughout the fight, and won a decision. And I'm hoping this is a wake-up call for Alves, because this is the second time now that he's kind of thrown away fights. And the first time he won the decision, and this time he lost. And when you see somebody with that kind of power and that kind of athletic ability, and even just the general skill he has, I mean, he's going to the body with combinations, mixing up his strikes nicely, doing good work, who just kind of doesn't have who just fights a terrible fight. It's really frustrating.
I think former co-host Patrick Wyman put it best on Twitter, where he said, in this fight, we found out there was more of Eric Silva to Warlley Alves than there was of Jacare. Like he as like an ex-gym teammate of both of them, this fight he seemed to trend more towards the Eric Silva, I'm gonna ace you in one round, and if I don't, I get tired and my game kind of falls apart a little bit.
He's got much better striking chops and a better chin than Eric Silva, which were some of the huge hallmarks of Eric Silva's problems. Yeah. But he definitely has the massive front-running problems that Eric Silva seems to have. Hopefully not as bad and hopefully not as consistently, but that is something that Silva was never really able to solve.
Yeah.
So that's a worry. I mean, it could just be a gym that just fosters that. I also got to say, Cummins,
is it a disappointment if like in the back of your head you're like, this is the one where the Brazilian veteran might pull out the win and like get the crowd going crazy, and then it happens in like the most Patrick Cummins way?
It's a loss that kind of makes me like write off Cummins as a prospect. I gotta say,
it is. To pair it's Brendan Schaub's loss to Big Nog, like the one where you're like, oh, all right, so he's not going to be a thing.
Yeah, because I mean he's already well past the date of youth at 35, and I've been kind of floating along and giving him a pass on a lot of stuff because he's really fairly new to MMA. But this is the fight where it's just like, is this really going to turn out? Because, I mean, the moment they started talking, and as he was walking out, and they started talking like, oh, he's really decided he needs to be a more patient fighter, fight with a little less aggression, and really try and, not get hit as much when he's going in for takedowns, be more reactive and stuff like that. I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. Like, it's good for fighters to build that patience into their game, but against Little Nog, that's exactly the wrong guy to just let pick at you from range.
I mean, I think the issue, and I think a big part of the issue here is just that, we talked. It was a big talking point when Brock Lesnar was in MMA that some guys just don't react well to being hit, and it's part of the reason why not every it's a real thing. It's part of the reason why not every All-American wrestler walks into MMA and immediately becomes a top 10 fighter. I think. Even if Patrick Cummins was 10 years younger, I don't think he'd end up being an amazing MMA fighter. Not because he's not a great wrestler. He's a great wrestler. By all accounts, a great guy. Just really seems to suck at striking and really seems to when he gets hit, he reacts really poorly.
Yeah, well, it's one of those weird things, too, I think, where it's like, even when it seems on the surface like he's doing a lot of things properly in terms of stance or how he's holding his hands and things like that, he just has this knack for getting hit really hard. It's sort of that Michael Bisping knack where you'll watch Bisping and you're like, oh yeah, he's doing really well as a striker, and he's light on his feet, he's moving well, he's staying outside and all that. And then he has this knack for hanging his chin in just the right way to get countered really hard by a huge shot that drops him.
You can book Bisping for hit really hard at least once a fight.
Yeah.
I agree.
And,
like that, set your watch by it.
And Bisping is, to his credit, really tough and really bounces back well from it most times when he doesn't just get put out cold. And he's been able to find a lot of ways to work around that tendency. But Cummins just has that same kind of thing where it's like, I don't even think his chin is bad because he takes a lot of shots to get knocked out.
Yeah.
But he just seems to get hit really hard by everyone.
Yeah. Yep, I would agree. It's one of those things. It's not a knock on him. I mean, like, it's just not everyone's not. I mean, there's a reason that there's so few elite light heavyweights out there. Yeah. It's a tough division at the top level to hang in. Even in Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira can fuck some people up, and if he gets put in there with the right people, there's only like 10, 15 people right now who fight professionally who could really mess that guy up.
Yep.
Despite the fact that he's almost 40.
I know. It's a weird place. Speaking of which, Corey Anderson, just before we jump into heavyweight talk, I'm least worried about Corey Anderson because he nearly pulled out a decision, and he could have deserved it. I scored the fight for him, but I have no problem with Shogun winning, considering that Shogun dropped him twice, and judges tend to score fight-changing offense as their first criteria. Mm-hmm. But Anderson is definitely running up against the opposite. He's running up against the opposite side of Patrick Cummins' problem, which is that without power, it's really tough to win at light heavyweight.
Yeah, and he doesn't do himself any favors in the sense that, he's got clipped hard. Really doesn't seem to have a sense for that left hand at all.
Yeah.
The punches that have gotten him in trouble consistently have been left hands, and just Shogun was lighting him up with it. Sheen Vellante lit him up with it. So that's a problem, and I don't know if the Kennel Fight Club is addressing it necessarily in the best way. So this might be the moment when Corey Anderson decides he needs to go beast somewhere other than, the Rockford, Illinois area.
Well, I think he's now with Renzo Gracie and Nick Catone.
Is he?
Yeah. Although maybe that's out in Rockford. I mean, he's training with who's the striking coach that Connor really loves and had on a couple times.
Is he with Team Takedown?
No, but I can't.
Oh yeah, no, he's fighting out in New Jersey now. So yeah, he recently switched over. Yeah. So
he's in New Jersey. So
it's a noticeable problem that he gets hit with left hand.
Yeah,
so
he's got the right camp around him to develop, and I'm not worried about him not developing because he's stupid tough and he's got the gas tank to survive. So he can maybe form that Bisping-like ability of just being this durable volume punisher that grows his way in a division with almost nobody there to stop him.
Well, yeah, and we're talking about a guy who is still 3 years out from peaking, most likely. So like a guy we're going to talk about in a minute, like Stipe Miocic had some ups and downs on his way up. But he got a lot of time to develop, and we watched a lot of it in the UFC.
And he also was not, Stipe didn't not have any finishes at all, but Stipe also, to Anderson's similar credit, has not always been a notable finisher.
Yeah, he developed power kind of later in his. He's
had a lot of knockouts because it's heavyweight, but he's also a heavyweight who gets a lot of late knockouts. Mm-hmm. Because he's an attritive striker. He's had a couple of first round KOs, but he's also
tell that to Werdum.
I know that was still so remarkable. So let's jump over then to Stipe Miocic, who is just sort of at the border edge of what we would consider a prospect. I mean, obviously he's champ now, so there's no reason to consider him a prospect. He's a finished product coming into his own.
I don't think he's not a prospect, but I think he's worth us talking about because holy shit, heavyweight has a champion who falls within a regular aging curve for MMA.
It's true. It seems unheard of, but it's true. Stipe has been in for just coming up on 6 years in MMA now, and has hit his stride right when fighters should be hitting their stride.
Yeah, it's not like, we got Fabricio Werdum, getting there with 13 years of professional fighting experience under his belt. When most guys are thinking about retiring. I mean, this is all right. So I don't think Stipe is necessarily the guy to lock down the heavyweight title for the vaunted 3 defenses that the division so badly needs.
Probably not, but
I mean, he is 33 years old. He got into the sport slightly later than we would probably consider to be ideal. But he also had a lot of amateur fights. I mean, he took his first amateur fight 10 years ago. He's still a part-time fighter, so the heavyweight weirdness continues.
Yep.
But, I mean, part of the issue here is that heavyweight is just so top-heavy with old fighters that I believe that's a big contributing factor to the inconsistency that we see at heavyweight. Everyone talks about the power of heavyweights, and that's a totally valid point that needs to be brought up. Heavyweights hit hard. Heavyweights hit a lot harder than they're able to be tough.
Yeah.
Even tough heavyweights get knocked out because you're in a division where the guys are 250 pounds, and if they get good weight transfer on their shots, you're getting put down. You may not be out, but you're probably getting dropped with a good shot. But I mean, when you look at it, how many fighters are there on the UFC heavyweight roster? I don't know the total number off the top of my head.
Close to 40. It's like 39, 38.
Yeah, of them, because I went through the other day and looked at every single fighter on the UFC heavyweight roster. Do you know how many of them are under the age of 30?
Not many.
8.
Yeah.
And one of those is Stefan Struve.
I know.
Who I don't really count because the guy's been fighting professionally for 11 years at this point.
Yeah. But
so you're talking about 7 guys who are under the age of 30 in that heavyweight division, and all of them are in their first 3 fights in the promotion.
Yeah.
I mean, the UFC, and we talked about on the show, the UFC is they're desperately looking for anyone mildly new at heavyweight.
Well, I think they've done it. I think they went out and they got everyone pretty much. I mean, there may be 3 or 4 people out left on the regionals that they didn't get, but they got, they've done a pretty good deep scour to go out and find the heavyweight talent. And I will say this. I think that there's an unreasonable expectation from fans and media and analysts to focus on age as the primary, heavyweight weirdness. The division's so bad, none of these guys are under 30. It's yeah, but they all fight till they're 40. So how much do we really care that none of them are under 30?
I think that is valid. I think that's totally valid until we get an actual 26-year-old excellent athlete who can fight. And then I think it'll be really apparent that these guys are 38 and 40. In the same way that when John Jones came storming through the heavyweight division, it was holy crap, all these guys look so old now. It's yeah, it's because they're fighting a 26-year-old and they're all 33, 34.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, because the thing with heavyweight is it would have to be, that athlete would have to be stupid tough too. That's the thing, is that there are all these weird factors that come into play at heavyweight that don't necessarily come into play anywhere else. They come into play to some extent at light heavyweight, but at heavyweight, most of the guys that survive up until their near 40s, with the exception of Andrei Arlovsky and Fabricio Werdum, who are, I would say, really elite athletes. Not Fabricio Werdum. I mean Andrei Arlovsky and Alistair Overeem.
Okay, I was going to dispute that. But yeah, I'm on board with those two.
Yeah, Andrei Arlovsky and Alistair Overeem, especially you watch them when they're younger, and Overeem still almost any time up to this last fight when he looked a little softer and slower. But you watch them when they're younger. They're both incredibly, incredibly athletic individuals, really superb athletes, and they've been able to survive for years and years and years at heavyweight, almost just based on that. But the other guys who survive well past any normal fighter's sell-by date, they are all just like the stupid, toughest sons of bitches out there. Guys like Fabricio Verdum, Josh Barnett, Ben Rothwell, like
and they've been in the game long enough to build a really deep technical skill set. Like even Ben Rothwell is damn technical on some things.
But even if they aren't, they're just so big and so tough that unless you can absolutely just, like Daniel Cormier versus Josh Barnett style, ragdoll them around the cage, you're not gonna hurt them. You're not gonna KO them. So you have to hang with them and have as good a cardio as they do and be able to stay safe everywhere, round after round, because they're not going to be the ones that go anywhere.
No, and I agree. And I think, but part of the reason why these guys are hanging around as long as they are is because we're not getting new young fighters who have those traits. Like we're not getting new young, like a lot of new young fighters in that division. Because if we did, I feel like we'd see, if we were getting comparable level guys coming in as we were to like an Alistair Overeem, we would see some turnover occur. And there's like basically like there are three fairly young heavyweights who are in the first 6 years of their career who I'm like excited about within the UFC right now. And that's kind of it. Everyone else is like, there's some guys who are over 30 who could still really be interesting fighters. But it's like Francis Ngannou, Curtis Blades, and Ruslan Magomedov are like three dudes that I think could bring some turnover to the heavyweight division and boot out like your Roy Nelsons and like a couple of the other dudes who are like really ready to go.
Yeah, but my question is, has heavyweight ever had that kind of turnover really?
Nah, no, it's a fair point.
Because
it's gonna have to happen eventually because these guys will eventually die of old age.
Yes, this is true, but I think there's a problem too of like optics of the old days of heavyweight, especially the Pride era and the UFC during the Pride era, where you just got all of these steroid inflated middleweights who were fighting at 220, 230 pounds. And they gave this constant feeling of buoyed numbers in a division that was otherwise ruled by a very small group of actual talent.
Yeah, I will say that the last like real infusion of talent the heavyweight division got was probably in 2000, like the 2006, 2008 run when Kane and JDS both came up.
Yeah. And
that was like the last real infusion of young talent.
And to the UFC's discredit, over the 5 years that followed that, from like 2010 or from 2009, say.
Oh, and I should say Brock came up in that time period as well.
Yeah. And to the UFC's discredit, in the time that followed that, from 2009 to 2014, the UFC didn't really actually sign any inexperienced heavyweights of any note whatsoever. A lot of them ended up over in Bellator, fighting there. Guys like Minikoff and Cole Conrad, Volkov.
And they both, and a lot of them decided to get out of the sport.
Yep. And, the UFC, like, they just spent 5 years where their goal in those 5 years was to go out, it seems, and get all of the experienced, long-time, tough vets that were still kicking around. They went back out and got Josh Barnett. They went back out and got Alistair Overeem. They went back out and got Ben Rothwell. And they brought in all these big, old, tough, rugged heavyweights that they hadn't picked up already.
Yeah.
And now that they've done that, it seems like, hopefully, over the last year, they went out and signed 10 new young guys who are at least reasonably young. Even if they're not young, like under 30, they're young in the sport. They have a lot of room to grow. They have time to develop. And like I say, in a division where guys can fight till 40 if they're tough enough, I don't worry about it. I don't know that heavyweight's actually changed all that much. It's just the bar for entry has gotten higher, and as the bar for entry has gotten higher, the division has shrunk because of it.
I think, too, that it's worth pointing out that there is some turnover that happens in the heavyweight division, but it's like a chunk of the heavyweight division basically retires. Yeah. And I really do think like 06 to 08 is when the last real big one happened, because that's when you had Tim Sylvia get booted from the UFC and basically stopped being a relevant heavyweight. Randy Couture basically hung it up after that. Wasn't that around when like Brandon Vera like dropped down to light heavyweight, called it quits from like the heavyweight division?
Could be. I think that's around the time Heath Herring. Well, obviously, with the Brock Lesnar fight was the last one of Heath Herring's career, so he.
Yeah. So like that was the last like real, and then we've had Brock Lesnar leave because of medical issues and that, but like, and Big Nog retired, or is he officially retired?
Oh yeah, Big Nog's gone.
Yeah, so like we've had one or two guys drop, but like that range, like 06 to 08, was like an exodus of like several top-ranked heavyweights from like the prime international scene, and I think we're coming up on another one. I think we got a couple guys.
Sounds like
if we're not in the midst of it already, huh?
Sounds like Frank Mir might be done.
Yeah, we might be in the midst of it. We might be like Frank Mir, Big Nog, and I wouldn't be surprised if like Roy Nelson and Andre Arlovsky didn't really make it through the next couple years of like younger guys. Some of the younger guys starting to come up.
Well, the other thing that's interesting here is that, and because you talked about Stipe Miocic being on like a normal curve for what we consider like a normal prospect curve, and how rare that is. But the interesting thing is that outside of, unless I'm just totally skipping somebody, but outside of Fabricio Verdum, pretty much the last 3 UFC heavyweight champions, and well, even in counting Brock Lesnar, maybe you could argue 4 have been on that normal curve.
Yeah, I think. When did Kane start fighting?
He started fighting in.
Kane won his first title in 06. And then he re-won the title in 12. Yeah, so he's within that range too. Or he won in 10. Sorry, he started as So that's totally fair.
I mean, what we may be seeing too with the bar being, like I say, I think that the bar has been raised on the heavyweight division where you're not probably going to see a lot of, frankly, you're not going to see a lot of the kind of guys that filled the division previously. Maybe not Tim. I don't know. I feel bad beating up on Tim Sylvia, but maybe not see like the big Nogs, frankly, who clocked in at like 230 pounds and whose twin brother fights at light heavyweight, or the Randy Coutures who were able to survive as a 220-pound heavyweight.
Mm-hmm. And I would say it's worth pointing out that like in 2010 to like 2012-ish, like we had a really nice little run of heavyweight where we had a whole bunch of fighters who were kind of on top of their game.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had Kane and Dos Santos like at the top as like these 2 like in their prime heavyweights.
Yeah.
That was also 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's true. I mean,
like that's we're talking like, the Kane winning his first title at like the peak of his, like at the beginning of his peak was when Stipe Miocic was taking his first pro MMA fight. Yeah. Like it's one of those things that just like the time has moved, and we had like a little heavyweight renaissance in 2010, and now like 2010 to 2012, but now 4 to 6 years later, it feels like we're in a bit of a quagmire again with heavyweight, and we're waiting for like the next batch of talent to rise up.
Yeah, the problem, like I say, with the idea that the bar has been raised and that it just has made the division, it's made it harder and harder for talent to break out and come through, is that I think, because it's always been, like I say, I think it's always been this thing where you get these random, heavyweight's always been dominated by these random sort of bright sparks that come out of nowhere, and then suddenly they're like the most dominant guy in the world.
for 2 fights, and then that. Yeah, no, that's.
Well, no,
I think that's totally right.
yeah, like I mean, Fedor just kind of suddenly it was like
Well,
he hits
Fedor is
the
the grand exception. Like,
no,
it's
no, no,
one of
no, no,
those.
no. But I'm not talking about bright sparks as in like they come and go in a flash. I'm saying that like with heavyweights, actual prospects who turn into good fighters, it's just like there'll be like a guy every few years who just comes along, and this is going to be your new top heavyweight for the next decade or for the next however long until he stops fighting. And you're never going to get like, it's not like lightweight where every year there are 5 new guys that come in, any of whom might rise up the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And it just because the math is too wonky. There's too many weird exceptions. You have to be super tough. You have to hit super hard. You have to have cardio to fight longer than a round. You have to have all these things that 265-pound humans just don't tend to necessarily have.
Yeah.
And including just be coordinated. There are a shit ton of big dudes who are like the most uncoordinated people on the planet.
Yeah.
And so you've raised, it used to be that you wouldn't notice that there weren't that many bright sparks coming up the path because it used to be flooded with all these low-end grinders, these 220-pound inflated, Kazuyuki Fujitas.
Yeah.
And so you had all this filler for the rare talents to fight, and it didn't really trigger that, oh, there aren't very many talents. It was just like, oh, there's all these talents and we get to see the best ones, and then there's a lot of good ones. And it's like, no, there's a lot of really bad ones and a few really good ones. And once you say, okay, you're not doing, steroids are less prevalent theoretically, and the UFC is taking it, they don't like to do one-off fights. They're taking a much more closed stance on this is what a heavyweight looks like. These days, it's like you have to be a 6'4", 250-pound behemoth to get signed by the UFC, it seems like.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's very clear just how rare it is for those actual elite talents to come along that have always been that rare.
Mm-hmm. I think that's all fair, and I think too that as those elite talents have become more like rare, they remain rare. It's harder for them to rise up the ranks, and then from that 2010 point till now, like not all, but a lot of the new entries to the top 10 have been Andrei Arlovsky's back.
Yep.
Mark Hunt is now a top 10 fighter.
Yeah.
And like all these names that you're just like, really? This guy can't possibly do this. And then he takes out some like good heavyweight fighters, and the reaction is, so heavyweight's just trash, huh? Like it's just garbage. Like, because
yeah, it to my mind, it's, and like I say, I think mostly that's just because that's who they signed over the past 5 years.
Yep. No, I think their signing practices had a lot to do with it. Where like now suddenly you're looking at 12-10. Mark Hunt is like a top 10 heavyweight in the sport, not just in the UFC. And that's partially because of the fights he's getting. That's partially because he got a lot better as a fighter, and almost all of his losses are from 06 to 010.
And it's partially just because the guys they've been signing lately are guys like Mark Hunt. So the fights that Mark Hunt has had in the UFC are, people like Ben Rothwell, who's been fighting forever, Czech Congo, who's been fighting forever, Stefan Struve, who's been fighting forever.
And then he gets in there against similar levels of athletes, similar levels of guys with broken down bodies, and then you get pretty evenly contested fights because they're on the same level, and you just wonder what Junior Dos Santos and Cain Velasquez are getting to that totally broke. They're getting more broken down. Yeah. But they're still a step ahead of that generation, like the Mark Hunts. Mm-hmm. And then you get these guys like Stipe coming up. I'm really interested to see what a late 2016, early 2017 fight between Stipe and Junior Dos Santos would look like. Well, yeah. I want to see that veteran boxer Junior Dos Santos that we saw come out and pick Ben Rothwell apart against a peaking Stipe Miocic. That's a fight I want to see.
But we did see that, didn't we?
Kind of. I think 2014 was a little bit different. I think we still had a slightly more dynamic Junior Dos Santos in there.
Yeah.
And I want to see like what I'm interested in those kind of fights, and I think heavyweight does have an interesting future. And I think I think we're going to start seeing some of the Mark Hunts and Andrei Arlovsky start to fall off. And hopefully some of these younger guys like Francis Ngannou start to rise up. And obviously Rashid Magomedov, who's already in the or Ruslan Magomedov, who's already in like the top 15. I want to start seeing him get some interesting fights and see if he can hang with the upper end of the division.
Yeah, Derek Lewis too. I mean, he's not that young, but he's charging up that division in a hurry, and it seems like he's going to be a new fixture at the top 10.
He could be a ruiner of aging veterans. Like, he could wreck some old veterans.
I'm happy he's got that Roy Nelson fight coming up. I'm excited to see him versus Roy.
Because you want to watch Roy Nelson die a little bit more?
No, but I think it's the perfect fight to test to let Derek Lewis get a good test and really try and get over because it's a guy who's historically been tough as shit and who's knocked people out, who tried to knock him out against a guy who can knock anybody out. So that to me is
I think it's a good piece of matchmaking. Like, what do you do against a guy who is famously tough as all fuck?
So it should be a fun fight, and I think the point for me delving into heavyweights, every time I feel like I have to make this, it's like I've become the defender of the heavyweight division because I really think it's a much less bad division than it's been made out to be.
I don't think it's bad. I think the signing practices of the UFC and the general lack of abundance of talent, because let's face it, like, guys that big who are that athletic can make shit tons of money in other sports. Yeah. Like, they're not going to – the MMA is not the first, second, or third place they look. It is outside the top 10 sports you look to when you're that big and athletic.
Yep.
So it's not shocking that we don't get a lot of athletes. So we're seeing the best version of that. We're seeing the best version that we're probably going to see. Like, this is what heavyweight's going to be. But hopefully we get – in the future just – they don't maybe we don't have like a 6-year gap between signing a lot of young heavyweights and seeing what happens.
Yeah, I hope that they can keep it up a little better than they did for the past few years. And I mean, it just like I can easily see, especially with that, if Strikeforce hadn't come along, and I already think it's better than light heavyweight, I could see heavyweight continuing on as a more healthy, I want to say, division than middleweight or light heavyweight.
Yeah, I can see that.
Just because I think it already is healthier than light heavyweight. Light heavyweight is such a hellhole of, like we just saw, Corey Anderson and Patrick Cummins get beat by Shogun and Little Nog.
Light heavyweight has all the same problems. And then on top of that, they don't have the power to like knock each other out and be that super entertaining all the time.
Yeah, they don't have. They have all the same problems, and they have even more of a disparity because they fall in a better line for like international big guys, where like if you're that big relatively, you could be and you run all the time instead of lift weights and punch people, you could go play soccer instead. Whereas at heavyweight, guys you're getting there, they're not going to be soccer players,
Yeah, soccer's the one sport that those guys probably won't excel at.
Yeah, but at light heavyweight, you could technically get some guys that some 6'3", 6'4" guys who, if they spent all their time running on fields instead, could be playing soccer instead of fighting. And so light heavyweight's only got like 30 people in it right now. Heavyweight's got 40. Yeah,
I think light heavyweight has a bigger issue. Also, it's just a more common size for people to beat.
Yeah. And also, at middleweight, like, if Strikeforce hadn't come along, look at what middleweight would look like right now. It would be Anderson Silva, Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman, Robert Whittaker, Uriah Hall, Rafael Natal. Like, those are your top – Dan Henderson, CB Dollaway. Those are your top UFC middleweights.
Yeah, I think middleweight might. We'll see. Middleweight has gotten more infusions of talent in the last 10 years than heavyweight and light heavyweight combined.
Yeah, but there's not much going on at the bottom of middleweight. That's the problem. Is that there's not a whole lot coming into the bottom of that division where you're like, oh, this guy just came in and he's just gonna like run roughshod over the ranks. Where, you know, even at welterweight and lightweight, for as massively deep as those divisions are, you do get guys who just run up the ranks. They fight all the time. They do really well. They're exciting, and you can see them getting up to the top 15 and being good forces there. Like, you get a Khabib Nurmagomedov, you know, you get a
Chris Weidman.
Well, yeah, Chris Weidman at middleweight. But
yeah, I was gonna say Chris Weidman did it at middleweight. So, but I take your point. That, you know,
he's one of the rare few for the UFC at middleweight. Like, there has not.
Yeah.
You know,
I would say also in a way Yoel Romero, mostly because Yoel got like stuck in a weird place.
But he's a Strikeforce dude.
Well, he fought one fight in Strikeforce.
I know, but he came over because of Strikeforce. If it hadn't been for Strikeforce, the UFC may never have ended up with Yoel Romero.
He was on radars for a while. He just had a weird situation in terms of like his it was something to do with where he was living at the time. He was living in Germany, wasn't it? Yeah, so it was more of like a weird situation of like being able to get him to fight overseas. And Strikeforce worked it out for one fight, and then the UFC grabbed him, and he just took off.
Yeah, I don't necessarily trust that the UFC. I mean, they're trying to do it with looking for a fight, but Strikeforce had a much better history of going out and taking chances on inexperienced athletes that they thought they could turn into and build into really good fighters. And you're seeing that out of Bellator now with their run of signing top collegiate wrestlers before they ever touch MMA.
Yeah.
And the UFC is still very, like, they're trying to do that with looking for a fight, and they keep running into their matchmaking problems of just, like, throwing these kids in against regional level grinders that chew them up and spit them back out.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think Yoel Romero would have been picked up. There was some buzz behind that dude even before Strikeforce got him. I remember hearing about him back in like 2010. People being like, oh, this dude, someone needs to pick up this guy. And the gif of him ankle picking that guy being everywhere.
But, you know, you don't think there was none of that buzz around like Darian Caldwell, who's, you know?
Yeah, but it was Romero doing it. Romero had buzz as an MMA fighter, whereas I feel like Caldwell had more buzz as as a wrestler. Did he have any fights before he fought in Bellator?
A few.
Yeah. So no, I take the point.
Yeah.
The UFC is just not great about going out and getting guys early in their career, unless it's on tough. Yeah. Unless like they get Matt Riddle.
Exactly. Oh, Matt Riddle. Okay. On that note, I want to take a look at the upcoming week a bit, just because we got a bunch of people. There's no UFC event, but there's a shit ton of MMA this week, and a lot of prospects fighting. We got a Bellator card coming up here where we've got Rafael Carvalho is pretty much the most notable fighter on that card. He's now their current middleweight champ, and he's really developed from a power striking game. It seems like he's developing his power striking game into being a more complete fighter, a more dangerous, you know, transferring that, upscaling it in a way that a lot of fighters don't, into being and staying dangerous at a higher level. Yeah,
I would agree with that. He's a good, youngish, exciting middleweight.
Yeah, and otherwise, you know, they've got like Augusto Sakai on there, who
is a heavyweight.
Heavyweight.
He's a heavyweight, and he's 24, and he's undefeated. So like that's it right there.
Pretty much, he's got that weirdness of being like big and tough and aggressive that is just enough to win the most heavyweight fights.
Yeah. Yep.
And they've got some weirdness going on with the Joe Hamilton Tyler Freeland fight. Looks like a weird scrap. But off Bellator over to
Bellator has to maintain some sort of carnival sideshowy like aura at all times.
Jumping over to Victory FC real quick, they seem to have picked up some better World Series of Fighting prospects. I don't know what's going on with that, why those guys aren't fighting with World Series of Fighting anymore, but they got Kelvin Tiller and Chuka Willis.
Yeah, that was a little odd that both those guys ended up in Victory. But yeah, both definitely worth checking out.
Good athletes, good, powerful athletes developing their MMA game. Guys, I'm excited to see. There's also a CFFC show this week and a Tachi Palace fight. It's got some talent. And if you head over to, there are like 3 major Russia cards this week, 2 of which are talent laden. Like there's a Tachi, or there's a Akhmat, ACB, and then a Tech Crep, I think. I want to say is the other one.
Yeah.
But the ACB and Akhmat shows are both just
loaded.
So they've got Anatoly Tokov, Sergey Khandozhko, Oleg Borisov, Askar Askarov are all on that ACB fight. Borisov, Khandozhko, and Tokov are all guys that ended up on our scouting report.
Yep.
In one form.
That's a really good card.
Yeah. I'm always excited to watch Tokov fight. He's such a fun physical beast. So is Borisov. Khandozhko's got that whole sort of Russian Muay Thai thing going on.
Yeah.
Fun striker. And then over on that Akhmat show, they've got Magomed Bibulatov, definitely one of the better prospects out there. Khusein Khaliev, great prospect. He's fighting a recent UFC cut, Volmir Lazaro. I'm actually surprised that Khaliev hasn't ended up in the UFC already, considering his ties to K Dojo.
Yeah, they're not great about getting Russians into the UFC, man.
And I wonder if there's some weirdness tied to his brother, because they brought over his brother a couple of years ago, Adam Khaliev, and he got injured, had some visa problems, I think, and then maybe just like fucked off to Kudo. People ask me about him all the time, like what happened to Adam Khaliev, because he's never fought in MMA again, and I have no clue.
But like, man, Kushin, like, he has the personality too. Like, that dude needs to be fighting in the UFC.
Yeah,
like, you know.
And they've also
now.
Yeah, he's a great fighter. Really fun style, fun personality. Should be making the jump. I'm not sure why he's not, but
it's definitely not as ties to. It's definitely not as ties to like what the Chechnyan warlord do, because like every freaking UFC fighter is hanging out with that guy.
It's true. You can't blame.
Like that's another thing that like Kushin has like met and hung out with like half the UFC champions too because of that.
Yeah. Saying, and then also I'm interested to see this because they have Frodo Hasbulaev on that Akhmat show, and he's fighting some young guy called Khunkar Osmaev, and I'm interested to see what this kid's got, because if they're throwing him in with Frodo, he's either like in for a squash match or they think he's got some serious talent. So that's something to watch out for. There's also a bunch of fights in Brazil going on. There's a jungle fight card with Polyana Viana, one of the more notable rising strawweights out there, who's just like a power-punching brawler.
Mm-hmm.
Still very raw, but you know, with strawweight being the premier women's division in the UFC, it's always worth watching out for fighters like her who could be coming up. And Paulo Henrique Costa, who I scouted as I believe as a middleweight, good athlete, kind of a raw talent at the time. He's fighting a big fight on Jungle Fight. I'm interested to see that. And the Shooto Brazil card, which has Felipe Froes and Nicolas Mata, both Nova Unao fighters, both very much.
Two of our top 5 featherweight prospects.
Yep. Both Nova Unao Muay Thai stylists on the Shooto Brazil card. Both young guys I'm excited to see.
Oh, there was another one. To jump around, Max Fight has ADCC champ Davy Ramos.
Yeah.
Fighting in it.
Out of Bellator. He fought in Bellator last, but now he's back in Brazil fighting for Max Fight.
Yeah.
And Immortal FC's got a guy named Joao Elias, who I'm interested to see him. He looks like a good athlete and a good wrestler coming up on the Brazilian scene, which is kind of rare. So I'm interested to see what he can offer. And of course, then we've got some more European cards with Venator coming up here, and Emil Weber Meek's going to preparing to get squashed by Husamal Palhares
Oof.
and
Carl
Carl
Moore.
Moore, who we scouted as a light heavyweight preparing to fight. So I'm real interested in that too. And
Was he? Where did he fight previously before?
he was a Cage Warriors guy.
Yeah, I was gonna say because when Cage Warriors did their whole thing, he went to Bama and then lost a fight, and now is with Venator.
Yeah, and also former UFC fighter Pavel Pavlov's fighting with and alongside Mikhail Michalski in Poland. Same also in Poland. There's a heavyweight bout I'm interested in on PLMMA. Adam Vizrek versus Zumana Cisse. Who Cisse is somebody I've been keeping my eye on at heavyweight. He's 12-1 now. His only loss came in a fight over an M1 Global, I think. French scene guy, powerful, not in very good shape. One of those heavyweights who seems to be like fighting himself into shape. But has a win over Francis Ngannou. So interesting fight there. Over in Asia, there's a Top FC versus what's the Kunlun fight card going on? It looks like it's got some interesting people. Regional prospect Guan Ho Kwok is fighting Alptekanaz Kilic, former UFC fighter, and a couple other notable talents or interesting talents on the card. So there's a lot going on regionally this week. A lot of guys to watch out for and look up, keep an eye on. I'll post a list of all this stuff in the comments below. And otherwise, any other thoughts before we cut this thing?
Nope, that's it.
All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at TheSameTime. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. Give this video a thumbs up. That's this thing down below. That helps us a bunch. Subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM over on YouTube. That's how you get all our other shows, interviews, analysis, all that good stuff we do. Probably have vivisections for the Bellator card, maybe the Venator card too for the shit of it this week coming at you. And then we'll have we've got If I Did It, all our other shows, Heavy Hands. We'll have a Knuckle Up this weekend, all that good stuff. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.